I decided to visit my husband at his job as a CEO. I expected a proud moment, a glimpse into the world we'd built. Instead, I was met with a sign on the glass wall at the entrance that read, "No employees' spouses allowed beyond this point." I stared at it, confused. First, thought it was a joke. But when the receptionist looked me up and down and said, "Company policy, ma'am," humiliation sank in. I stood there, invisible in the empire I had once helped him build. There the security guard walked over and asked who I was here to see. When I told him I was Mr. Bennett's wife, he shook his head. "Ma'am, Mrs. Bennett was already here this morning." My heart dropped. I tried to explain that I was his wife, that we'd been married for 38 years. He looked at me with pity, and said someone would escort me out. I stood there frozen, watching other people walk past me, into the building my husband owned. The glass doors reflected my confused face back at me. After all these years, I had become a stranger at my own husband's workplace. The guard made a call on his radio. 2 more security officers appeared. They weren't rough, but they made it clear I needed to leave. I walked back to my car, hands shaking. I sat in the parking lot for 2 hours. My phone felt heavy in my purse, but I couldn't bring myself to call him. What would I even say? Why does someone else claim to be your wife? The question sounded insane even in my head. Cars came and went around me. Professional people in suits, carrying briefcases and coffee cups. They all belonged there. I didn't. 38 years of marriage, and I couldn't even walk into his office. I remembered when he started the company 20 years ago. I had helped him draft the business plan at our kitchen table. I had gone without new clothes, so we could afford the initial investment. When he worked late, I brought him dinner. When clients rejected him, I told him to keep trying. Now I couldn't get past the front door. The afternoon sun made the car hot, but I didn't move. I just sat there, trying to understand what had just happened to my life. When he came home that evening, I was sitting at the kitchen table. He walked in like it was any normal day, loosening his tie, and asking what was for dinner. I asked him who the woman was. He stopped moving. Then he smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "What woman?" he asked. I told him about the sign, about the security guard, about someone else being called Mrs. Bennett. He laughed and said I must have misunderstood. "You know how security is," he said. "They're trained to be suspicious." But he wouldn't look at me when he spoke. He kept his eyes on his phone, scrolling through messages. I asked him again directly. He got irritated. "You're imagining things, Patricia," he said. "Maybe you should see someone about this paranoia." That word hit me like a slap. Paranoia. He was making me feel crazy for asking a simple question. I watched him walk upstairs to shower, and I knew he was lying. The way he wouldn't meet my eyes told me everything. I couldn't sleep that night. While he snored beside me, I went to his home office. He rarely used it anymore, but old boxes were stacked in the corner. I opened one and found photographs from the company's early days. There was a picture from the launch party 15 years ago. In the background, barely visible, was a wall plaque. I squinted at it. The company dedication read, "Founded by Theodore and Patricia Bennett." My name had been there once. I searched through more boxes and found newer promotional materials. Glossy brochures, press releases, magazine articles. I looked through every single one. My name was gone. Every piece of recent publicity called him self-made CEO Theodore Bennett. Not a single mention of me. It was like I had been erased from history. I sat on the floor surrounded by papers, and that's when I started to understand. This wasn't new. He had been removing me from his life for years. I had just been too trusting to notice. The next morning after he left for work, I did something I had never done before. I researched him online. I typed his name into the search engine and read everything. Articles called him a business genius, a self-made millionaire, a visionary leader. There were photos of him at charity galas, business conferences, award ceremonies. Not one article mentioned a wife. Not one photo showed me beside him. I found interviews where he talked about his journey. He spoke about struggling alone, building the company from nothing, sacrificing everything for success. He made it sound like he had done it all by himself. I remembered the nights I worked a second job, so he could quit his and focus on the business. I remembered selling my mother's jewelry to help with startup costs. I remembered being his secretary, accountant, and advisor all at once, without pay. But according to the internet, I didn't exist. I was a ghost in my own marriage. I printed out several articles and put them in a folder, evidence. I didn't know what I would do with it yet, but I needed proof that I wasn't going crazy. A week later I saw her. There was a charity event being broadcast on the local news channel. The camera panned across the crowd and stopped on my husband. He was smiling, holding someone's hand. The news anchor said, CEO Theodore Bennett and his wife Vanessa, at tonight's fundraiser. I couldn't breathe. She was younger than me, maybe in her early 40s. Beautiful in a polished way, wearing a dress that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. She smiled at the camera, like she belonged there. Like she was Mrs. Bennett. The real Mrs. Bennett. I sat on my couch, remote control gripping so tight in my hand that my knuckles turned white. They looked happy, comfortable, like a couple who had been together for years. The news moved on to the next story, but I couldn't stop staring at the screen. Who was she? How long had this been going on? And why was nobody questioning it? I called the television station, but they just referred me to the event organizers. When I called them, they hung up on me. Nobody would listen. Nobody cared that the wrong woman was being called Mrs. Bennett. Have you subscribed to this channel already? If you have not, please subscribe now and click the notification bell for more revenge stories that keep you at the edge of your seat. Thanks for your support. Back to the story. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't pack my bags and leave. Instead, I made a decision. I would make him remember who I was. But I wouldn't do it through tears or confrontation. I would do it through strategy. I went to the store and bought a new notebook. On the first page, I wrote, "Plan begins." I had spent 38 years being supportive, being quiet, being invisible. Now it was time to be something else. Smart. I started making lists. What did I know? What did I have? What could I use? I knew the company's history. I had been there since the beginning. I knew where the bodies were buried, so to speak. I had old documents, old contracts, old emails. Things from before he became successful enough to hire lawyers and accountants to handle everything. I had proof of my involvement. I had proof of my contributions. Most importantly, I had time. He thought I was just the quiet wife at home. He had no idea what I was capable of. I went to our old storage unit, the one we had rented when we first got married. He had probably forgotten it existed. Inside, buried under furniture and old clothes, I found a box labeled Company Files, 2005. I opened it carefully. Inside were the original business registration documents. And there, on the second page, was my name, Patricia Ann Bennett, co-founder. Not just supporter. Not just wife. Co-founder. I had legal standing. I took pictures of every page with my phone. Then I carefully packed everything back up and locked the storage unit. This was my seed of justice. He had tried to erase me from the company's story, but paperwork doesn't lie. Government records don't lie. I had proof that I wasn't just some delusional housewife making up stories. I had founded that company with him. I had equal claim to it. That night, I sat at the kitchen table with the photos on my phone, and for the first time in weeks, smiled. He had made a mistake. He had underestimated me. And that mistake was going to cost him everything. I found a lawyer through an old friend. Her name was Natalie Kemp, and she specialized in business law. I told her everything in her small office downtown. She listened without interrupting, taking notes. When I finished, she looked at the documents I had brought. She studied them for a long time. Then she looked up at me and said, "Mrs. Bennett, you have more power than you think." She explained that as a co-founder I had rights. Even if my name wasn't on current company materials, the original registration gave me legal standing. We could challenge the ownership structure. We could demand an audit. We could expose any irregularities. But it would take time and strategy. "We need to be smart about this," Natalie said. "If we move too fast, he'll hide everything. We need to gather more evidence first." I hired her that day. As I left her office, I stood taller than I had in years. I wasn't helpless. I wasn't invisible. I had a lawyer, I had documents, and I had a plan. Theodore Bennett had no idea what was coming. I started reaching out to old contacts. People who had worked with us in the early days, before the company grew big. Some had moved on to other jobs. Some had retired. But they all remembered me. One woman named Beatrice actually cried when I called her. "Patricia, I wondered what happened to you," she said. "You just disappeared from the company." I told her bits and pieces of what had happened. She was angry on my behalf. "You were the backbone of that place," she said. "Theodore wouldn't have survived the first year without you." Others said similar things. They remembered me training them, helping them, guiding the company through rough patches. They remembered that I wasn't just Theodore's wife. I had been a real part of the business. I asked if they would be willing to help me if I needed it. Every single one said yes. Some offered to write statements. Some offered to testify if needed. I was building an army of truth. People who remembered the real story, before Theodore rewrote it to make himself the hero. With each phone call I felt stronger. I wasn't alone anymore. Natalie helped me do something I never thought I would do. Through a trust fund set up in my mother's maiden name, I started quietly buying shares in Theodore's company. The shares were publicly traded, though he still held majority control. But every small purchase I made gave me more power. The name on the paperwork wasn't mine. It was listed under the trust. Nobody could trace it back to me. Took months. I used money from an old inheritance I had kept separate, money Theodore didn't know about. Share by share, I built up a small position. It wasn't enough to control the company, but it was enough to have a voice. Enough to demand access to records. Enough to call for board meetings. Natalie smiled when she showed me the updated trust portfolio. "You're officially a shareholder," she said. I looked at the papers and felt something I hadn't felt in years. Power. Not the kind that comes from money or status, but the kind that comes from knowing you have rights, and you're ready to use them. Theodore had locked me out of his company. Now I was buying my way back in. I needed someone on the inside. Someone who could tell me what was really happening in the company. I reached out to an old friend named Diana, who still worked in the accounting department. We met for coffee at a quiet place far from the office. I told her what I was trying to do. She looked scared at first. "Patricia, I could lose my job," she said. Understood. I told her I wouldn't ask her to do anything illegal or dangerous. I just needed information. After thinking about it, she agreed to help. Over the next few weeks, Diana sent me copies of reports, memos, and meeting minutes. Nothing classified, just internal communications that shareholders had a right to see anyway. What I discovered shocked me. Behind all the success and publicity, the company was struggling. There were cost overruns on major projects. Some clients weren't paying their bills. Theodore had taken out loans that the board didn't fully understand. The perfect image he showed to the world was hiding serious problems. I saved every document Diana sent me. This was more ammunition. Not just proof of my erasure, but proof that Theodore wasn't the genius everyone thought he was. The company was in trouble, and he was hiding it. The deeper I dug, the worse it got. With Diana's help, I found out that Theodore had been filing incomplete financial reports. Not exactly fraud, but definitely misleading. He had hidden certain debts in subsidiary companies. He had delayed reporting losses until after shareholders' meetings. He had painted a picture of success, while the foundation was cracking. I showed everything to Natalie. She brought in a forensic accountant to review the materials. The accountant confirmed what I suspected. This company is one bad quarter away from serious trouble, he said. If the board knew the full truth, they would be furious. If shareholders knew, there would be lawsuits. Theodore had built a house of cards, and I was about to blow on it. But I had to be careful. If I revealed everything too soon, he would find a way to cover it up. He was good at that. Good at hiding, good at lying, good at rewriting reality. I needed to wait for the perfect moment. The moment when exposure would hurt him most, and help me most. That moment was coming. I could feel it. Dinner one night, Theodore complained about something unusual. Someone's been buying up shares, he said, frustrated. Small amounts, through some trust. I can't figure out who it is. Kept my face neutral. Is that a problem? Yes. It's annoying, he said. I don't like not knowing who's investing in my company. Whoever it is, they're going to regret it when I find out. I took a sip of water and said nothing. Inside I was smiling. He had no idea he was threatening his own wife. Over the next few days, he became more paranoid. He had his lawyers trying to trace the trust. He called board members asking if they knew anything. He even hired a private investigator to look into it. But the trust was set up perfectly. Legally clean, completely private. There was no way to connect it to me. Watching him stress about it gave me a strange satisfaction. For years he had controlled everything, including me. Now he was losing control and he didn't even know why. I kept playing the supportive wife, making his meals and asking about his day. All while his world slowly started crumbling around him. Through Natalie, I managed to meet one of the company's biggest investors, a woman named Victoria Strand. She had a reputation for being smart and direct. I invited her to tea at a nice hotel. I told her my story. First, she looked skeptical. Rich wives complaining about their husbands weren't unusual in her world. But then I showed her the documents. The original registration papers with my name. The old contracts. The statements from former employees. Her expression changed. This is real, she said, almost to herself. He nodded. He erased me and is now destroying the company. I showed her the financial irregularities Diana had found. Victoria studied them carefully. Does the board know about this? She asked. No, I said. But they should. Victoria set down her teacup and looked at me with new respect. Mrs. Bennet, I think it's time we called for an independent audit. She had the power to make that happen. As one of the largest outside investors, she could demand transparency. We shook hands across the table. I had just gained a very powerful ally. Theodore's perfect little empire was about to face serious scrutiny. Natalie and I worked for weeks preparing everything. We organized documents chronologically. We created summaries of key evidence. We prepared statements from former employees. We had the financial analyst's report. We had proof of my co-founder status. We had evidence of misleading financial reporting. Every piece of information was cross-referenced and verified. Natalie wanted no mistakes. Once we make our move, there's no going back, she said. We need everything to be perfect. I reviewed documents until my eyes hurt. I practiced answering potential questions. I prepared for every argument Theodore might make. He would say I was a bitter ex trying to cause trouble. He would say the co-founder title was just paperwork, that I hadn't really done anything. He would say I was mentally unstable, which he had already started suggesting. But we had evidence for everything. Proof that I had been essential to the company's founding. Proof that he had systematically removed me from company records. Proof that he was hiding financial problems. By the time we finished preparing, felt ready. Ready to face him, ready to face the board, ready to take back what was mine. The plan was set. Now we just needed the right moment to execute it. Victoria made her move. As a major investor, she formally requested an independent audit of the company's finances. The board couldn't refuse without looking suspicious. Within days, auditors showed up at company headquarters. Theodore was furious. I heard about it from Diana, who said he was yelling at people, demanding to know who had requested the audit. He held emergency meetings with his lawyers. He started reviewing every financial document personally, trying to find anything that might look bad. The company was in chaos. Employees whispered in hallways. Board members asked questions. Theodore's perfect control was slipping. And still, he had no idea I was behind it. He came home angry every night, complaining about paranoid investors and regulatory overreach. Someone's trying to ruin me, he said one evening. I poured him a drink and asked who he thought it was. I don't know, he admitted. But they're powerful. This isn't random. I sat across from him, the woman he had erased and ignored, and said softly, maybe they're just someone who's tired of being forgotten. He didn't even look at me when I said it. He was too absorbed in his own crisis to hear the truth I had just spoken. The audit took 6 weeks. During that time, Theodore barely slept. He was at the office constantly, trying to manage the situation. The auditors found exactly what we knew they would find. Incomplete financial reporting. Hidden debts. Misleading statements to shareholders. Not enough to be criminal, but enough to be damaging. Very damaging. The board called an emergency meeting. As a shareholder through the trust, I had the right to attend. Natalie filed the paperwork making sure I would be present. Theodore still didn't know. The meeting was scheduled for a Thursday morning. I dressed carefully that day. Professional but not flashy. I wanted to look like someone who belonged in that boardroom. Natalie drove me to the office building. The same building where security had thrown me out months ago. But this time, I walked through the front door as a shareholder. Nobody stopped me. I rode the elevator to the top floor. My heart was pounding, but my hands were steady. The boardroom doors opened, and I walked inside. Theodore was already there, sitting at the head of the table. When he saw me, his face went completely white. For several seconds nobody spoke. Then the board chairman cleared his throat and said, "Let's begin." I took my seat at the table. Theodore stared at me like he was seeing a ghost. "What is she doing here?" he demanded. Natalie stood up. "My client is here as a representative of the Harrison Family Trust, which holds a significant share position in this company." Theodore looked confused. "What trust?" "The one that's been buying shares for the past 6 months," Natalie said calmly. I watched understanding dawn on his face. The mysterious investor he'd been worried about. It was me. Before he could respond, I placed a folder on the table. Inside were copies of the original company registration documents. I'm also here as co-founder, I said clearly. Patricia and Bennett. My name is on the founding paperwork. I slid copies around the table. Board members picked them up, reading carefully. Theodore tried to speak, but Victoria interrupted him. The audit results show serious irregularities in financial reporting, she said. Before we address that, I think we need to understand the company's true ownership structure. The board chairman looked at the documents, then at Theodore, then at me. Mr. Bennett, he said slowly, can you explain why your co-founder isn't listed anywhere in current company materials? Theodore's mouth opened and closed. For once in his life, he had no smooth answer. The meeting lasted 4 hours. Theodore tried to minimize my role. She helped with some paperwork in the early days, he said. But the company was really my vision. I let him talk. Then I presented statements from former employees. 5 different people describing how I had trained them, managed projects, solved problems. How I had been essential to the company's survival in those first years. One statement was from the company's first major client, who said he had only signed because he trusted me. Theodore's face got redder with each statement. Then Natalie presented the financial irregularities. The hidden debts, the misleading reports, the incomplete disclosures. Theodore tried to explain them away as accounting differences. But the forensic accountant's report made it clear. This wasn't innocent mistakes. This was deliberate obscuring of the company's real financial position. Victoria asked the question everyone was thinking. Mr. Bennett, did you knowingly mislead the board about the company's financial health? The room waited for his answer. He looked around the table, seeing doubt on every face. Even his supporters looked uncertain. Finally, he said, I was trying to protect the company. By lying? Victoria asked. Silence. That silence was his confession. The board took a recess. Theodore tried to corner me in the hallway. What do you think you're doing? He hissed. I looked at the man I had been married to for 38 years. I'm taking back what you stole, I said calmly. I built this company with you. You don't get to erase me. You're going to destroy everything, he asked. No, I replied. You did that yourself. I'm just making sure everyone knows the truth. He looked like he wanted to argue more, but Natalie stepped between us. My client has nothing more to say to you, she told him. When the board reconvened, they had made their decision. Theodore would remain as CEO, but under supervision. A new financial oversight committee would be created. All major decisions would require board approval. His power was being stripped away, piece by piece. But the biggest change was what they said next. The board chairman looked at me. Mrs. Bennett, given your co-founder status and the current situation, the board would like to offer you a position as senior strategic advisor. Accepted. Theodore's face was a mask of fury and disbelief. His perfect little empire, where he was king, had just let his erased wife back in the door. And there was nothing he could do about it. The news spread fast. Business reporters started asking questions. Why had a co-founder been missing from company materials? Why had financial reporting been incomplete? What was really going on at Bennett Enterprises? Theodore tried to control the narrative, but it was too late. People were digging into the company's history, finding old articles that mentioned me, interviewing former employees who remembered the truth. The perfect image he had crafted was crumbling. Investment analysts downgraded the company's stock. Some clients started asking uncomfortable questions. Board members who had supported Theodore began distancing themselves. Victoria told me privately that there was talk of forcing him out completely. Within 3 weeks, Theodore was given a choice: resign with a severance package, or face a vote of no confidence. He chose to resign. The man who had called himself a self-made genius was stepping down in disgrace. I didn't celebrate. There was no joy in watching someone fall, even someone who had hurt me. But there was satisfaction in knowing that the truth had won. That I had been acknowledged. That my contributions had been recognized. Theodore Bennett was no longer the untouchable CEO. He was just a man who had made very bad choices. And I was finally free from his shadow. He came to the house one evening, a week after his resignation was announced. I was in the kitchen when I heard the door open. He looked terrible. Unshaven, tired, defeated. "Can we talk?" he asked. I led him to the living room. We sat on opposite ends of the couch, like strangers. "Please, Patricia," he said. "Don't destroy everything we built." I looked at him carefully. "We?" he asked. "You spent years pretending I didn't exist. You introduced another woman as your wife. You tried to make me feel crazy for asking questions." He put his head in his hands. "I made mistakes." "Mistakes," said. "Theodore, you didn't make mistakes. You made choices. You chose to erase me. You chose to lie. You chose to risk the company's future rather than share credit." "I'm sorry," he whispered. "Are you?" he asked. "Are you sorry for what you did? Or just sorry you got caught?" He didn't answer. That told me everything. I stood up. "You should leave now." He looked up at me, searching for any softness, any forgiveness. But I had spent months being soft. Being forgiving. Being invisible. Not anymore. "Goodbye, Theodore," he said. He left without another word. I watched his car pull away, and felt something I hadn't felt in years. The man who had taken everything from me was gone, and I was still standing. 6 months later, I walked back into Bennett Enterprises as senior strategic advisor. The company had stabilized under new leadership. Financial reporting was transparent now. The hidden debts were being addressed. Clients were regaining confidence. I had an office on the executive floor. Not as big as Theodore's old one, but it was mine. My name was on the door. My name was back in company materials. The erasure had been reversed. I wasn't doing it for money. My position came with a salary, but I didn't need it. I was doing it so every woman who had ever given up her dreams for a man could see me standing. So every person who had been erased, forgotten, or dismissed could know that the truth eventually comes out. On my first day, several employees stopped by to welcome me. Some were people I had trained decades ago. Some were new and had only heard stories. One young woman said, "You're an inspiration." Smiled. "I'm just someone who refused to stay invisible." That evening, I drove home through the city. Lights were coming on. People were ending their workdays. Everything looked the same, but for me, everything was different. I had my name back. I had my dignity back. I had myself back. And that was worth more than any empire. A year after everything changed, I returned to Bennett Enterprises for a board meeting. As I approached the entrance, I noticed something different. The old sign was gone. The one that said, "No family members allowed." In its place was a new one, brass and prominent. It read, "All partners welcome." I smiled and walked through the glass doors. Inside the lobby, I saw someone sitting in the waiting area. Theodore. He was there for a meeting with his lawyers, something about finalizing his separation from the company. Our eyes met across the marble floor. He looked older now. Smaller somehow. The confident CEO was gone. In his place was just a man who had lost everything, because he couldn't share. I walked toward him, He stood up, uncertain. When I reached him, I spoke softly. Company policy, Theodore. All partners are welcome now. I saw him understand. The building where he had once banned me, where he had erased my existence, was now a place where I belonged and he didn't. I walked past him toward the elevators. My heels clicked on the marble. My head was high. Behind me, I heard him sit back down heavily. I pressed the button and waited for the elevator. The doors opened, and I stepped inside. As they closed, I caught one last glimpse of him in the lobby. Alone, forgotten. Free at last. What can you say about the story? Was Patricia only after revenge? What would you have done differently as Patricia? Share your thoughts. Don't forget to subscribe and share with others. Anticipate more Reddit stories.